Sigmund Freud, The Future of an Illusion, Chapter 2. We have slipped unawares out of the economic field into the field of psychology. At first, we were tempted to look for the assets of civilization in the available wealth and in the regulations for its distribution. But with the recognition that every civilization rests on a compulsion to work and a renunciation of instinct, and therefore inevitably provokes opposition from those affected by these demands, it has become clear that civilization cannot consist principally or solely in wealth itself, and the means of acquiring it and the arrangements for its distribution. For these things are threatened by the rebelliousness and destructive mania of the participants in civilization. Alongside of wealth, we now come upon the means by which civilization can be defended, measures of coercion and other measures that are intended to reconcile men to it, and to recompense them for their sacrifices. These latter may be described as the mental assets of civilization. For the sake of a uniform terminology, we will describe the fact that an instinct cannot be satisfied as a frustration, the regulation by which this frustration is established as a prohibition, and the condition which is produced by the prohibition as a privation. The first step is to distinguish between privations which affect everyone and privations which do not affect everyone but only groups, classes, or even single individuals. The former are the earliest. With the prohibitions that established them, civilization, who knows how many thousands of years ago, began to detach man from his primordial animal condition. We have found to our surprise that these privations are still operative and still form the kernel of hostility to civilization. The instinctual wishes that suffer under them are born afresh with every child. There is a class of people, the neurotics, who already react to these frustrations with asocial behavior. Among these instinctual wishes are those of incest, cannibalism, and lust for killing. It sounds strange to place alongside one another wishes which everyone seems united in repudiating, and others about which there is so much lively dispute in our civilization as to whether they shall be permitted or frustrated. But psychologically it is justifiable to do so. Nor is the attitude of civilization to these oldest instinctual wishes by any means uniform. Cannibalism alone seems to be universally prescribed and, to the non-psychoanalytic view, to have been completely surmounted. The strength of the incestuous wishes can still be detected behind the prohibition against them, and under certain conditions killing is still practiced, and indeed commanded by our civilization. It is possible that cultural developments lie ahead of us in which the satisfaction of yet other wishes, which are entirely permissible today, will appear just as unacceptable as cannibalism does now. These earliest instinctual renunciations already involve a psychological factor, which remains important for all further instinctual renunciations as well. It is not true that the human mind has undergone no development since the earliest times, and that, in contrast to the advances of science and technology, it is the same today as it was at the beginning of history. We can point out one of these mental advances at once. It is in keeping with the course of human development that external coercion gradually becomes internalized. For a special mental agency, man's superego takes it over, and includes it among its commandments. Footnote 1. See Chapter 3 of The Ego and the Id, 1923b, Standard Edition, 1928, footnote. Every child presents this process of transformation to us. Only by that means does it become a moral and social being. Such a strengthening of the superego is a most precious cultural asset in the psychological field. Those in whom it has taken place are turned from being opponents of civilization into being its vehicles. The greater their number is in a cultural unit, the more secure is its culture, and the more it can dispense with external measures of coercion. Now the degree of this internalization differs greatly between the various instinctual prohibitions. As regards the earliest cultural demands which I have mentioned, the internalization seems to have been very extensively achieved, if we leave out of account the unwelcome exception of the neurotics. But the case is altered when we turn to the other instinctual claims. Here we observe with surprise and concern that a majority of people obey the cultural prohibitions on these points only under the pressure of external coercion. That is, only where that coercion can make itself effective, and so long as it is to be feared. This is also true of what are known as the moral demands of civilization, which likewise apply to everyone. Most of one's experiences of man's moral untrustworthiness fall into this category. There are countless civilized people who would shrink from murder or incest, but who do not deny themselves the satisfaction of their avarice, their aggressive urges, or their sexual lusts, and who do not hesitate to injure other people by lies, fraud, and calumny, so long as they can remain unpunished for it, and this, no doubt, has always been so through many ages of civilization. If we turn to those restrictions that apply only to certain classes of society, we meet with a state of things which is flagrant and which has always been recognized. It is to be expected that these underprivileged classes will envy the favored ones their privileges, and will do all they can to free themselves from their own surplus of privation. Where this is not possible, a permanent measure of discontent will persist within the culture concerned, and this can lead to dangerous revolts. If, however, a culture has not got beyond a point at which the satisfaction of one portion of its participants depends upon the suppression of another, and perhaps larger portion, and this is the case in all present-day cultures, it is understandable that the suppressed people should develop an intense hostility towards a culture whose existence they make possible by their work, but in whose wealth they have too small a share. In such conditions, an internalization of the cultural prohibitions among the suppressed people is not to be expected. On the contrary, they are not prepared to acknowledge the prohibitions, they are intent on destroying the culture itself, and possibly even on doing away with the postulates on which it is based. The hostility of these classes to civilization is so obvious that it has caused the more latent hostility of the social strata that are better provided for to be overlooked. The hostility of these classes to civilization is so obvious that it has caused the more latent hostility of the social strata that are better provided for to be overlooked. It goes without saying that a civilization which leaves so large a number of its participants unsatisfied and drives them into revolt neither has nor deserves the prospect of a lasting existence. The extent to which a civilization's precepts have been internalized, to express it popularly and unpsychologically, the moral level of its participants, is not the only form of mental wealth that comes into consideration in estimating a civilization's value. There are in addition its assets in the shape of ideals and artistic creations, that is, the satisfactions that can be derived from those sources. People will be only too readily inclined to include among the psychical assets of a culture its ideals, its estimates of what achievements are the highest and the most to be striven after. It will seem at first as though these ideals would determine the achievements of the cultural unit, but the actual course of events would appear to be that the ideals are based on the first achievements which have been made possible by a combination of the culture's internal gifts and external circumstances, and that these first achievements are then held onto by the ideal as something to be carried further. The satisfaction which the ideal offers to the participants in the culture is thus of a narcissistic nature. It rests on their pride in what has already been successfully achieved. To make this satisfaction complete calls for a comparison with other cultures which have aimed at different achievements and have developed different ideals. On the strength of these differences, every culture claims the right to look down on the rest. In this way, cultural ideals become a source of discord and enmity between different cultural units, as can be seen most clearly in the case of nations. The narcissistic satisfaction provided by the cultural ideal is also among the forces which are successful in combating the hostility to culture within the cultural unit. This satisfaction can be shared in not only by the favored classes, which enjoy the benefits of the culture,